Inauguration, a new beginning for a new president. And one of the biggest issues facing the new administration is the problem of health care for the poor, for the elderly, for all Americans. But what of the president's health? Who oversees the well-being of our chief executive? Surely as president, he must receive the best possible medical attention. But this may not have always been the case. Robert Farrell is Professor Emeritus of History at Indiana University and author of Ill-Advised, a new book that examines presidential health and the public trust. In it, Farrell acts as a detective, digging in old records and files and conducting interviews to learn the truth about health in the White House.
It was a very interesting thing because Cleveland served 2 non-consecutive terms, and his second term began in March of 1893. In May of that year, he felt a sore place. It was a rough spot in the roof of his mouth, and he thought it was a canker and tried to forget about it, but it enlarged rather rapidly, and so he had an Army surgeon come in and take a look at it. It turned out to be cancer. There was concern about the secrecy of the whole thing, and it was fortunately possible to take out this rather large part in the roof of Cleveland's mouth, to take it out with a cheek retractor, which allowed the surgeons to pull out his cheek and cut it from his jaw. And then after that, they worked inside his mouth, and even down to the place where they inserted a rubber prosthesis. A dentist did this after the operation, so that there was no difference in his speech. The fact of the operation did not become known until 1917.
President Woodrow Wilson was straight from the conference tables of Europe when in October of 1919, while on a speaking tour to drum up support for the League of Nations, he suffered a massive stroke. Only his wife and a few close aides were allowed to see him. Because there was no clear way to remove a president who had fallen ill, no government official would take the responsibility for such a decision. Many believe Wilson's wife effectively ran the government during her husband's illness. For over a year and a half, his own vice president was not allowed to see him.
There was nothing really wrong with Cleveland's medical care that I can determine, but there was a definite problem with the care of Woodrow Wilson. Wilson's physician, Dr. Cary Grayson, who became a rear admiral in the Navy, Grayson had 1 year in medical school, that's all. And he attended a little medical school that is now defunct at a place that is now known as the University of the South. He was not well trained. If Wilson had been forced out, then the presidency would have gone to his vice president, who was Thomas R. Marshall of Indiana. And that might have been very interesting, because I think the treaty with the covenant would have passed, and if it had passed, then the United States, one can go on and on, in the 20s and 30s might well have followed a course in foreign policy that would have been more realistic. We would have taken interest in Europe, and had we taken interest in Europe, we might have done something about the German question, which perhaps would have prevented World War II. It's a nice issue to speculate on.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected president in 1932. A man of great charm, charisma, and political savvy, his health was far from the best. A bout with infantile paralysis in 1923 left him paralyzed from the waist down. Nevertheless, he served an unprecedented 3 terms as president before dying early in his 4th term in May of 1945.
Because of Roosevelt's illness, which was so severe, it was clear to the leaders of the party that Roosevelt would win in November, but he could not survive this fourth term. So it was necessary, they believed, to get Henry Wallace out. They thought that he was simply not suitable for the presidency and put in a man whom they could trust, who, by their measurement, was Harry Truman. But Wallace wanted a second term as vice president. He knew that this was going to be the presidency, and they were fighting for it at the Chicago Convention. And how that passed then to Truman was an almost miraculous and rather devious business.
Farrell also explores other cases in his writing and allows the reader to speculate on alternative presidential possibilities. If Eisenhower's heart attacks had removed him from the office, Richard Nixon may have achieved the presidency more than a decade earlier, and without the burden of Vietnam or Watergate. Knowledge of Kennedy's condition, now known as Addison's disease, may have denied him the nomination. And how would knowledge of Reagan's medical history affected his second term?
I think anyone running for the presidency, and that would include incumbents, ought to make their medical records completely open. There should be nothing should be sacrosanct. There should be no embarrassment. If a candidate feels embarrassed by having this sort of thing public knowledge, I don't think he or she should run.
We all here at Across Indiana wish the president well as he begins his term. He faces a lot of problems and a long road ahead. We also hope he'll keep bundled up and watch out when he jogs, because as president, the state of his health is now a matter of state.